everyone, what is going on? It is Will here with the Sunvit-D3 Army F430. It's finally time to put this gearbox back together. We've got lots to do and not a lot of time to do it. So I've got 2 days to get this car back together. 1.5 days I've got this afternoon/evening, and then I've got a full day next week to get this all back together and done. I've ordered a OBD tool that can do two-way communication with the ECUs and TCUs, so I can reprogram the gearbox when it's all back together. So we'll see that later in this episode. I'm hoping I can squeeze all this into one episode, but we'll see how we go. And what's the time crunch, I hear you ask? Well, the car, the Sunvit-D3 Army F430, will be displayed, will be displayed at the British Grand Prix, so Silverstone, in early July, first weekend of July. So come and see us if you're there. We'll be at the military recruiting village. Yeah, I'll be there talking to everyone. We'll have a good time, but the car's got to be fixed. So no time to waste then with this lot. Assembly is effectively the reversal of disassembly, minus the welding and bashing and other things that you should never do to gearboxes like this. But what I'm going to do is get this lined up in the press, and get the new synchro pressed on with a little bit of gearbox oil, just help it down, and then all of this can go back together. Need to torque down the lock nuts, and that'll be that bit done. Then it's putting it all back together in this thing, sandwich plate, fascia plate. I do have a bit of concern about this bearing that seems to have popped up. I'm going to replace it with this one. Although it seems fine. Actually no, it doesn't, it's a little bit crunchy. Yeah, so we'll get rid of that, pressing the new one. And then it should, all of this should be back together, hopefully, and we'll squeeze it back in the car. We'll put the car on the ramps, and with a few pairs of hands, hopefully we can massage that all back in. So Ferrari tool special number, I don't know, but basically I've made a socket by welding in a couple of little tabs, and that is in order to do up these lock nuts. Okay, so we're good to go with this. Going to thread on the lock nuts. The manual calls for 100 Newton meters, so we're going to try and torque these on now with some Loctite thread lock as well. I'm going to use the heavy high heat thread lock. Done! Awesome, so that is the main shaft back together, laid up next to the lay shaft. The only thing I want to do now is change this bearing here. Got a new one, so we'll get that pressed in, and then we can put everything back into the sandwich plate. we got the gear set back together, well, back in the sandwich plate. All we need to do now is get it fed into the back end of the car. Okay then, it is a week later, that haircut, and yeah, I've got a full day today to get the gear set back into the back of the car. So we've got the car on the ramps. We've been tirelessly cleaning everything, so the back of the gearbox casing, all the looks clean, doesn't it? All the mounting surfaces have been scraped and cleaned, so we've got a good tight seal. And what we're going to do now is do a dry run of putting the gear set back into the back end. We're just going to make sure that we can get it in there without causing any trouble, and then we'll put the sealant on the mounting face and send it home for the final time. Okay guys, she is home. That was actually relatively easy. I was probably a bit overly cautious with putting that in. As long as it goes in square, it goes in pretty easy. I did have to wiggle the shift forks a little bit just to send them home, but you can really see everything you need to see through the diff housing on the side, and through the shift forks on the other side, so you can just make sure everything lines up and send it home. One thing just to make sure of is the clutch, or the input shaft from the clutch to the actual into the gearbox. Make sure that that lines up and slots in nice. Obviously that's where that plastic bearing is, so just need to be careful making sure that comes home nice. Put the what do we call that, half shaft for the diff, just sent that home and got that bolted down. Yeah, so all we need to do now is put the diff unit back in, rear cover back on, put the rear cover back on, which includes the reverse gear and the reverse synchro, that which all needs to go on the back on here, and that should be the gearbox done, really. Don't forget the new O-ring. See that in there. Lovely jubbly. Okay guys, it is another day with the Sunvit-D3 Army F430. We are still not there with the gearbox. We were up quite late last night, ended up down a deep rabbit hole trying to sort out various issues. So yeah, whilst the GoPro was charging last night, because the batteries are great, this is the third GoPro by the way that I'm working on to try and get some good audio and stable video. But basically we got the diff back in the side of the gearbox, got the drive shafts back on, got the exhaust, part of the exhaust back on, filled it up with oil, and the car just wouldn't roll forward easily. Wouldn't roll forward easily. And the issue was, I think, and I'll use the old synchro as an example, I think the synchros just need a bit of bedding in. Now I did soak them in oil, but the way these work is effectively a bit like a clutch to slow down the gear so it will engage the synchro smoothly. And this is your kind of ferrous material, and you can see how sort of worn / bedded in it is. But this is effectively sandwiched between these two steel rings, just like a clutch, and these 4 lugs locate inside the gear to slow the gear down. Well, not slow the gear down, to slow the shaft down, so that the synchro can engage nice and smoothly. And you'll see that even like pressed on here, I really can't turn the centre synchro ring because it's sandwiched in there. So you can push the car forward, and I've managed to run the engine up and it didn't like explode the gearbox, or because the gearbox is always turning even when the engine's running, as long as the clutch is engaged, just out of gear. So I think that's fine. I think it just needs a bit of bedding in. And then the second issue that I was really struggling with last night was getting the car to pass its self-learn procedure as it runs through the gears, and that's just taking a reading of the potentiometers, recording the voltages so it knows its gear position. Now, went through this quite a lot last night and was using the Hill Engineering jig again and again in various positions to try and get the correct center point on the actuator block. And just couldn't get there where it would pass the self-learning procedure. I've got it now to pass through 1st to 4th gear and reverse gear, but 5th and 6th gear just won't engage nicely. And that would be down to 2 things, well potentially 3 things. The most likely is that the alignment on the actuator isn't correct, and the second is that potentiometers are on their way out. Now we did have an issue with 6th gear. Whenever it went into 6th gear it couldn't recognise that it was in 6th gear, and that could be a potentiometer issue. Or the third issue could be the actuator block itself is faulty and that needs rebuilding. All of these could lead to the damaged gearbox that we have obviously seen. So today then what we're going to do is we're going to realign the actuator. So I read on the internet last night, once I got home, that the correct center point for the actuator is between the 3rd and 4th gate. So I can shift the car into 4th gear, and then put it into neutral, and it should center it in the correct position. So the internet says. And the other thing I can do is with my launch scan tool, I will read the outputs of the potentiometers and make sure that they're in the correct range. If we're seeing 0 when it goes into 6th gear, for example, or way above the calibrated range, then we know we've got a potentiometer issue. By the way, it's worth noting that I've got like this morning / a little bit this afternoon to get this sorted out, because then we're going to the F1. Oh God. Okay, so skip forward another 4 days from the part of the video you've just seen. I managed to get 1 more day free to be able to work on the car, and this was the day before we had to get the car to the F1. So in the last sort of part of the video I was having a nightmare trying to get the car to pass its self-test. Eventually we worked out that the potentiometers needed replacing. Luckily I was able to order those and find what I think was probably the last set available in the country, if not the world at the moment. So got those in the car. I just made sure that like whilst the car was sat static, I could move the shift forks manually myself forward and backward into each gear easily. And I did find that like 5th and 6th, the synchros are actually kind of butting up against each other. and I just had to roll the car around a little bit just to get everything nice and aligned to give the self-test sequence and the actuator the best chance of passing that sequence, which we managed to get through, and as you can see the car's rolling off the ramps, and it managed to, you know, I did give it a little pootle around outside of the workshop, managed to run it through all of its gears, and it ran through all the gears fine, no untoward noises, everything worked as it should really, which was great news. I haven't tested the car in anger yet, which is the next thing to do, but hopefully the car is fixed. So a huge apology to you guys that I didn't finish the video properly. The time pressure of getting the car ready for the F1 was just really getting on top of me. But the car is back together and working again, and hopefully the next video we'll see the car running in anger. Thanks guys for watching, thank you so much, and I'll see you on the next one. There's some really good things coming with this car, and I'm sure you'll find out about that pretty soon. Cheers guys, bye bye.